Hey everyone, I am with Marissa. How do you say your last name? I didn't ask before we officially recorded.
Homère.
Homère. So I'm with
Yes,
Marissa Homère. She's the VP of Marketing over at Irwin. Do you want to give a background of your knowledge, your expertise, and then we'll dive into the key components for today's conversation.
sure thing. So I started my career in software, consumer software, a long time ago, on the social media side, actually. So back in 2010, when social media as a marketing vehicle wasn't necessarily mainstream at the time, I jumped into it at Corel, and I was there for a few years until I went agency side at a company that's now called Craft and Crew. At the time was called Social, where I was one of the early employees and helped build up the practice. I was in agency for 7 years, working with clients of all kinds across many industries and geographies, primarily in demand gen, as well as analytics and marketing strategy, consulting, website strategy, things of that nature. I moved client side a few years ago to a unified communications company who we basically sold voice over IP software to businesses, um, as well as video conferencing and other communications tools. Built the marketing team there for a few years, and a year and a half ago transitioned to Irwin, which is a capital markets and investor relations software company based out of Toronto, Series A funded startup. And since my time here, built out the marketing team and revenue engine, as well as worked on establishing the brand and growing the business overall.
Amazing.
That's me. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And the whole purpose of today's conversation is to really talk about leading in the middle of a recession. So, for marketing leaders, VP marketing of yourself, you have a lot of experience in general, and then also leading in a recession because the last time we spoke, you mentioned that kind of the pivotal moment of your career was figuring out how to lead in a recession. So, do you want to talk a little bit more about how you navigated that journey?
Yeah, for sure. So coming out of school, it was a challenging economic environment, not unlike, although slightly different to what we're seeing now. And, things were more scrutinized, budgets,
Mhm.
team sizes, resources, and everything was kind of under the microscope of performance and how that contributed to the company in a challenging environment. And we've seen this kind of ebb and flow throughout the years. Obviously, the last couple of years have been very different with the pandemic and you know uh, uh, a sort of flourishing economy, specifically in tech, and the growth that we've seen over the last 5+ years on the tech side has made way for room for experimentation and larger budgets. And then obviously coming into where we are now in the current market climate, it has become more difficult again. And difficult in the sense that everybody is just more cautious. Budgets are not as free flowing as they are. Investors want to see positive cash flows and efficiency on the financial side, and same with executive teams. So I think that there's a lot to be learned from these challenging times. There's lots of data on what you should and shouldn't invest in, and I think it's just, if you approach marketing and demand gen specifically, as I always have, obviously starting kind of where I did, I just had a lens for understanding what needs to be sold upwards, and how you do that and how you establish a program that can be less scrutinized, I think, by management teams, investors, financial teams, those kinds of things. And so I think, like, my best piece of advice is understanding impact, whether that impact is short or long term, whether it's financial or intangible. The way to establish yourself as a leader, and to establish yourself as a partner, a revenue partner specifically in the business, gives you the freedom and ability to take more risks, make more experimental choices, permitting that you have kind of like that underlying almost scientific revenue engine to generate
Mhm.
results for the business that makes your case easier to sell, so to speak.
Yeah, I love that. How would you go about understanding that impact? of if you have that engine, right, and you want to take these calculated risks, how do you assess that impact? How do you know if it's, something you actually should be doing or not be doing?
For sure. I think there's a couple ways. Depending obviously on your context, it may be different. So if you're new into a business and you're building something, it's a little bit more difficult, especially at first as you sort of generate that model or that science, so to speak. I think that everything has an impact, and everything may not be measurable in the sense of, dollars in, dollars out. But there are ways to measure and quantify the impact that you're making. So if you're thinking about brand as impact, understanding, where you sit in relation to your competitors or peer companies is really important. And I think understanding what it's going to take to outpace that, the LinkedIn B2B Institute has a great quote around brand is securing future cash flow. And I think you have to find ways to quantify that investment. And so, there's a number of different ways to do that. Measuring programs, measuring touch points. Digital is, good in that sense that there are ways that you can measure over the lifetime of a prospect or an account, how many touch points they've had with your brand, how many interactions you've had with them. And then there's, kind of like the unquantifiable side, which is what is the market saying about you? Obviously, the bigger and more and sort of less specific your audience is, the harder that's going to be to do, because it's much more difficult to prove impact on non-direct response initiatives when your market is very large. And so I think if you do like end up in a position where you're selling to tech marketers, that's an example of like a really big group.
Mhm.
um, Segmentation is really great, and because if you sort of execute on that segmentation, you can then, whether it's surveys or brand perception studies, which don't need to be crazy expensive or difficult, you can understand the unquantifiable impact that you're having and the perception of, how your key market views your brand. And then there are other things like experimentation and things that you want to try. And so I think if you do the work in establishing, revenue generation from a direct response model, you're then able to say, listen, we know that this is what we expect to see. In terms of results and revenue generated, there should be, like I always say, when you look at resourcing, there should be now, which is that direct response element. There should be next. So that's
Mm.
your brand involving in what comes next. And then there should be something reserved for new and things that you like, even if it's a small amount of money, a sort of slush fund that you can use to test and try things. Because outside of that kind of very defined direct response model that you build, you also want to be able to expand on it and scale on it. And that happens with new technology or new creative or, the new technology, the list is kind of endless there. But yeah, I think it's just like, if you have a predictable, scalable revenue engine, it gives you the ability to, invest in things that are slightly more intangible and things that will produce lift on that engine in the long term. And I think that's another important way to sell it, especially upward, is that, you can do what you're doing and build an engine that works, but if you don't invest in the future, then eventually you're going to lose efficiency on that revenue engine and the results are not going to be as good.
I love that. And the fact that you outlined the now, next, new, I thought that was phenomenal. It's a really great way to think about the programs and I guess, just allocating for some of the demand gen programs in general, because you have to think both short term and long term, to your point with brand and all that. So that's really a valuable takeaway, and I'll call that out for my listeners as well. You keep talking about having an established marketing engine. What about companies that don't have that? How do they go about building that given the economic recession?
That's a great question. And it's something that I did when I came into Irwin. There wasn't a predictable engine. There wasn't even an inbound model. So, and I think that's the first step is, take what information you have. It might be next to nothing, but what can you plot and pinpoint against? I always lean on the side of being conservative when building those programs. So starting small, testing things, and really the only way to do that, and something that's very popular in agencies, which actually gets lost when you go on to client side or into larger companies, is the concept of discovery. So for any new demand gen hire, marketing hire, that person needs to spend time discovering the market, doing due diligence, understanding what the audience is, what motivates them, what the current landscape looks like, what your product looks like, how it fits. And there might not be a lot of documentation or information about your product. It might not even be the right language, but I think it's just taking the time to really understand the business, working with founders or executive teams to understand their vision and understand, how they see the market. And sometimes, a lot of the times, even doing some of that work before you take a role, I think is really helpful. But you need to perform the discovery to understand the market and then find avenues that are open. And what I mean by that is look at the competitive marketplace. One of my favorite quotes by the former CMO of Nike is see what others see and find what others don't, which is, a lot, our sort of, especially in tech, like our environment and our landscape is overpopulated with, opportunities and products and things that exist that, are $20,000 away from solving your problem. And I think it's kind of stripping that out of the equation and looking at, if you empathize with the customer or the person that you're selling to, what opportunities are there to have them think differently, to have them to identify a problem that they might not even know that they have, and then build a program that speaks to that problem and your solution and how it can help them, whether that is through content and long form content or thought leadership or education or however you want to frame it. Community is another big one. Or it's actually just like a straight product solution kind of opportunity. There usually is one. And assuming that the product that you're selling solves a real need, especially in a recession, not a nice to have, but something that can actually help someone make a difference in their career with their manager, whatever, and leverage that opportunity. Test creative and concepts with a small budget. Nothing is going to work if you have no budget. And I think that's, especially if you're building a revenue engine, it just, economics doesn't work like that. And I know a lot of marketers are kind of plagued with that, like there's no money to do things. And I think that's like seeking out an environment where you can be successful, but building something small, testing things, and then trying to scale them. And so, especially in a startup environment, that process has to be kind of iterative and rapid fire. You have to be willing to do things yourself and build something that works so you can justify resources, whether that's people or money, and then model it. So, there's a lot of benefit, I think, in financial modeling and all that has to teach people like us, marketers and salespeople, understanding how to forecast things and how to sort of build out what the next 3, 6, 9 months looks like, and be open to the fact that it might change. But I think modeling it gives the credibility to what it is that you're trying to sell to, whether that's executives or investors or what have you. But I definitely think it's really important to start small and quick and then scale. And so, like in the case of Irwin, we started really small. We were testing things. Some things didn't work. We had, when I started, there was like agencies that we were working with that just weren't developing the results that the company was looking for. And so we just started from scratch and tried a couple of things, found a few areas that worked as we refined our messaging and, our brand messaging and our product messaging. And we did all of that simultaneously. So you have to be willing to move quickly, to try things, and to build something that is, borderline. Like, I think at the point that we're at now, what we have is borderline scientific. I can tell you what our year is most likely going to look like, what percentage of revenue we're going to generate for the business. And I think that is the best place to start. So you can build something that eventually matures and, gives you predictable results, and that you can sell upwards, so that there's so much confidence in it internally that, the extras that you ask for, the things that will make a difference long term are easy to slot in there.
There's so much to take away from everything you just said. I couldn't even like I'm like taking notes in my head. It's amazing. I love your knowledge. One of the things that you talked about is testing, starting small, and then having the challenge of marketers either having no budget or right now, right, they're being faced with budgets being cut. What do you think marketing leaders could be doing up front to minimize the impact of budget cuts?
It's tough. I think depending where you fall, what industry, what type of product you have, the answer is going to be slightly different for everybody. I think like honestly, the best thing as a marketing leader that you can do is due diligence in the company that you choose to work for, especially in tech, especially in startups. And, to be honest, even in mature companies, if you work for leadership who doesn't understand marketing, who doesn't understand like long-term demand generation and the value that that brings to the business, if they are just touting their sales organization, which is a fine thing to do, but it makes your job and will make your job that much harder. And I think like that's something that I've learned the hard way. Just that if they don't get it, they're not going to get it. And you're going to spend all of your time over advocating for your team, the things you want to do, the budgets you want, just because they assume that they know better, or they assume that, marketing doesn't actually add the value that you believe it does. And so that's number one. I think finding the right fit in terms of environment and finding leadership that really does understand and get marketing and trusts you to sort of build a program is like the foundation. And then I think it's building that program and having the science that goes with the art, just makes you more of a partner in the business. And as a partner, your voice is more influential. And what that does long term is protects you in times of crisis, right? And protects you not just in the sense of your job, but protects your ability to make decisions and your team and the things you want to do. It's really important to build credibility as you go, especially with your management team, with your audience as well. If your company is always getting feedback, oh man, like your content is really great and it's been really helpful, or like I love what you guys are doing. If they're always getting that feedback, it makes it really difficult to be like, we need to cut this, right? Because it becomes so intrinsically tied to your value proposition and your reputation in the market. So I think there's a lot of things that can be done to reduce that impact, but there are a lot of small things, and the larger ones are just like organizational, as well as having something to fall back on that makes you indispensable. If you're generating 70% of revenue from demand gen or marketing, it's going to be really difficult to justify cutting that, as opposed to if you don't necessarily understand that impact or you don't have a view into it. It's really easy to make those cuts as leadership, as finance, as different areas of the business that have a stake in it. So yeah, the answers are both infinite and kind of like there are some foundational things that really do make a difference in that you can do to help you protect the integrity of your budget and time and resources. And I also think that there is still really strong programs that are subject to cuts, and that's okay too, right? You have to understand and almost rank where everything falls, so where you can gain efficiency and what you can cut without impacting results. We all want these massive budgets that we can add on to at any time, or build on, or that give us the ability to try everything. But the reality is, it's not necessarily capital efficient to do that. So understanding where there are, and always building in that buffer so that you can reduce if you need to, even with positive results, I think is also a really good thing to keep in mind.
Building in a buffer, that's really intriguing. I'll keep that in mind in my own demand gen plans. That's a really good thought, yeah, to think about that, especially as I'm doing work for my own clients and I'm seeing those budget cuts. It's like how can we have that conversation on what's a healthy cut, and what
Yes,
won't just like, keep us sinking in the water, and how can we at least maintain something afloat and continue sailing. So that was really cool. I think
exactly.
the biggest thing that is a really good call out for the audience is not only, you have to make those, you have to do the research, and you have to make sure that, your leader understands marketing, which is another question that I'll get to you. But the biggest like takeaway from everything that you just said is that it's on you to do that. It's on yourself as a leader, as a marketing individual, to do that research, to understand the market, and to start making those relationships, and to do that analysis of the revenue and the impact and the budgets and everything. Like, nobody is going to step up and protect yourself. Nobody's going to protect you. So really taking that as like a takeaway from today's episode of how can you stand up and be a little bit more bold in your role, and understand how you can start making these justifiable impacts and conversations and relationships that will only benefit you in the long run, especially as we enter these harder months. Another question that I had
Absolutely.
Yeah, another question that I had for you based on what you just said. So you said one of the green flags for a company is having a leader that understands marketing. What are some examples of a leader that understands marketing and a leader that doesn't?
Ooh. You could probably do an entire episode on this, but
I'll have you back.
um, yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, it's hard to know. It's difficult, but after years and hundreds of clients on the agency side, and even still, I don't think you can always suss it out ahead of time. Um, but I think there are leaders, executives who believe that they can do marketing generally. Like, they know better than anyone. And there are ways that you can suss that out during interviews or working with clients. But I think it's someone who, honestly, some of the best leaders who get marketing come from sales, to be honest, or sales background, and end up in as a founder or as an executive in a business. They can also, heavily weigh on the other side of that, but they understand the value of things like brand, and I'd say deeply. So I feel like there's things that you need to ask as a candidate, or during, while you're looking for clients, that can kind of give you indicators of that, and whether that's perception of their existing brand, things that they think work, uh there's and tactics and things of that nature that they think are good for long-term business. Ultimately, it comes down to, do you understand the value of the short and the long-term initiatives? And that is, I would say, is probably the biggest indicator. It's like someone who understands that brand investment in brand generates future cash flows, or lifts performance of your outbound sales motion, or your direct response initiatives, will understand that it's necessary to invest in it. So it's hard to identify, but they are willing to give you autonomy and make decisions and trust you to make those decisions. They trust that there are calculated risks when it comes to things that are slightly more intangible, and they will collaborate without, co-opting your marketing or demand gen process, for example. So it's like they're willing to, you know, give you their inputs without necessarily derailing a conversation, or saying, like, I don't think there's any value in this. Versus someone who says, I might be skeptical, but I'm open to
Mhm.
seeing, and I'm open to giving it enough time to generate results. Because what happens on the other side, if you don't have leadership like that, especially at the, executive level, or client level even, is you spend so much of your time and energy convincing and selling internally,
Yeah.
which is, that's always a part of it. I think, like, you have to do that to a certain extent. But when, 50 to 60% of your time is spent just explaining and educating, the founders at Irwin are just overall excellent humans in general. But they have a lot of trust, and they not, and it's not only limited to their leadership team. They trust everybody in the company. They believe that they've hired the right smart people, and they, contribute and collaborate without, you know, telling people that it should be a certain way, and because they say so, versus I've worked with lots of executives who are like, I just want to do it my way. I'll let you talk, but ultimately I just want to do it my way. And so it's really difficult to quantify what the process looks like for finding those people, but you can usually tell pretty quickly after the fact whether or not they really get it or they don't, and I've had really successful campaigns by every KPI and metric possible, and a year later someone will come and be like, yeah, but that didn't really work, did it? And like, I think we should still go back to the way that we were doing it before, or let's invest all of our money in our SDR BDR function, and take it away from marketing, or you can't do this type of marketing, we don't think you should invest in brand. And the reality is that both things are important. All things can be true at the same time, and I think like having leadership that understands and recognizes the value in each of those contributions is fundamental to a successful program.
Yeah, I think understanding what that other marketing leader or, whoever you're interviewing for or reporting to, what they're measured on, and asking them what
Yes.
their incentive is. So if it's MQLs, if it's leads, if it's revenue, if it's SQLs, if it's opportunity, like all of that is going to give you a better understanding on, ultimately, right, you have a goal, and then whatever that goal is, it's going to get achieved, right? And so really understanding
Yeah.
what that
Yeah.
is behind it, and the motive and the incentive behind that. It's interesting though that you said that most of the ones who get marketing come from sales, because I've actually found the complete opposite. So
And it
maybe
can be, yeah, it can also be true in that sense, because I think it's like, I think it's like egoless salespeople, and
do they
egoless,
exist? No, just kidding.
they definitely
It was a
do.
joke, listeners. It was a joke.
Yeah, yeah. But it's people who deeply understand even just like impact throughout a business, and that everybody has a contribution to play. And kind of like you said too, if you walk into a business that is like KPI focused, and each department is paid and managed against a KPI that by itself means absolutely nothing, that is a red flag. I think I've worked with organizations who are over measured, and they're measured to their own detriment, because people's behaviors align with those KPIs. And so if you give me a goal of leads, which has always bothered me because it's, such a fluctuating thing,
And it's
metric.
minute of the larger
It's,
portion of growing a business.
it's so minute. It means literally nothing. And it is a number that can have the biggest amount of fluctuation without that fluctuation translating to results. You could have 700 leads, or you could have 70, and you can make more money from 70 than you can from 700. So I think that's another thing, how you have built the business and what those metrics are, like you said, that leaders are measured against, whether that's your sales team, your marketing team, your CS team, tells you a lot about what you need to know about the business. And so asking those questions and doing discovery there, like what are the processes to develop those? Are they arbitrarily set? Because that happens a lot too. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, I did some backwards math and we need 700 leads to get 10 new clients, and so our entire company is going to run on those numbers, when it's not true, B, you don't even know if it's possible, and C, you often align a arbitrary budget to go against those numbers. So
Mhm.
I think really understanding how a business is run and what the most important metrics are, and if there is a vision beyond those metrics, can tell you a lot about what you need to know about whether you will be successful in that company or not, by more than just the metrics that your department is held to.
Yeah, I love that. And you did a recent LinkedIn post, which is where I kind of quoted you from on that. So we're filming this on January 11th. So if anybody wants to go to Marissa's LinkedIn and find that post, she goes out in detail on the difference between KPIs and having an actual objective that people can report to and, start making a larger impact to the business instead of just focusing on that KPI as what she was saying, just leads. If you put the KPI as leads, everybody's going to hit the lead KPI, but you have to look at it a little bit further as the holistic view of the business and down funnel and pipeline and understanding those impacts. So understanding how to establish the correct measurement. So it was a really, really cool LinkedIn post. So everybody go follow Marissa, go look at that post. Because just in and of itself, I mean, I was like mic drop, right? And I think I commented with like hands up praise emoji and like a fire emoji. So you're definitely a knowledgeable individual, and I've really appreciated this conversation and would love to have you back to, talk about how to justify some of the relationships that you make with leadership and taking those calculated risks and understanding a marketing leader and just building those relationships with stakeholders and the green flags and red flags for people who are interviewing, who were laid off and are looking for their next big opportunity. So I really enjoyed this conversation. Is there any last couple of thoughts that you want to leave for the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I don't want to discount how hard it is to lead and manage a program in current marketing, like market conditions, or build a program right now. No, I definitely have had the benefit of, the last year and a half being able to build something and then walking in prepared to the economic climate that we're in. So it's difficult and it's challenging. And I think my only other piece of advice is that not everybody's advice is going to work for you, and best practices are very dangerous territory for setting yourself up for disappointment in your own capability or in your performance. And so I think it's just approaching the economic climate with a very reasonable set of expectations for a program. We're no longer in the age of unlimited funding and room for experimentation and growth. So I think it's just, there's cautious optimism to be had. There are things you can do to, limit the retribution on your program in terms of what the recession has done to it. So I definitely think there's things you can do, but don't necessarily hold yourself to the best practice because they're usually one-offs, or there's a lot more behind them that are not relevant or accessible to everybody. So I think it's just like, be kind to yourself too.
Yeah, I love that you specifically called out best practices because I've done a couple other pieces of content where I'm like, best practices means that there is enough to justify the existence, but does that still work anymore? Is that a way for you to stand out? If everybody's doing best practices, you're just going to blend in. So how can you,
Exactly.
this goes back to what you were saying, analyze, the quote from Nike, analyze what people are doing and then find a different avenue. So I thought that was
Mm-hmm.
amazing. So I've loved this conversation, Marissa. I know we're coming up on the tippity top of time, and I want to be respectful of your time. Where can people find you and get in touch with you?
LinkedIn is really the best place. I'm also in a number of Slack communities, although I feel like there's just like so many people in those. Sometimes it gets really impossible to make genuine connections. So LinkedIn's usually the best place. I'm always open to, conversations with the community because I think it's really beneficial to get diverse perspective as well. So I'm always happy to do Zoom chats or, get-togethers depending on where people are. But yeah, mainly LinkedIn in for me.
Yeah, and you and I met on the Women in Revenue Slack community. So
Yes, I do
if
love that one. That's one
it's
of
one
my
of my
favorites.
favorites too. Yeah, I would
Yeah,
100% agree with you on that. So
yeah, yeah, 100%. It's definitely like, I think because it has a very defined purpose.
right.
It makes it good. It makes it relevant and small enough that to be important.
And
So
everybody
I
that
love that
I've
community.
met, yeah, everybody that I've met has just been like a genuine individual and has really helped in my own career, my own personal, mentor advice, counseling, like pulse checks. It's been a phenomenal resource for me. So if you're a woman in
Yeah,
revenue,
same.
I highly recommend checking out that Slack community.
It's a good plug.
Yeah. So, well, Marissa, I've appreciated this conversation so much, and thank you so much for dedicating your time to me. That's all that we have today. So, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Janelle. I appreciate it.